Well, the Ashes remain in Australia, but England managed to save some face indeed. And that's why Mark Butcher has a bit of a smile on his face. Plenty of things to touch on now as we look back at what we saw and try to analyse it and what happens going forward now, because there's still some other series to come up for England. Let's start off with just what that last test win meant for England. I saw the phrase floating around saying that this win may not have been a band-aid for some of England's problems that we just spoke about last week before this match, but it probably saved some people's careers. So what do you think of that, Butch?
Yeah, possibly, Alexis. Number one, start at the top. Joe Root was very close to having sort of outright lost his last two Ashes series as captain, and there aren't too many captains that survive that.
And you were actually saying that you felt that he might not have been the right one to go on.
Well, indeed. I suppose one thing that this proved, though, was that if your batsmen score runs, if you manage to get a lead, you get in front in a Test match, and you've got bowlers of high quality, as Joe does and as England have, then you can you've got a little bit of wiggle room with your captaincy and the way that you deploy your troops and the tactics that you can use. So, perhaps we've been a little bit unfair on Joe tactically, because he's generally been scrambling to catch up with the game because his batsmen and he himself haven't scored enough runs. So, maybe the jury's out a tiny bit there, a tiny bit. So if we start there, very, very important for him. I think it was important for both teams. You saw Justin Langer's face at the end, the 2-2, they're hoisting the Ashes up, but he was very, very unhappy with the team's performance. Australia desperately wanted to go back, having won the series outright. And who knows, had they not bizarrely decided to invite England to bat first at the Oval.
Do you think the 2-2 ended up being an accurate representation of both teams?
I think both teams had opportunities to, Australia will still be wondering how they lost the Headingley Test match. England might be going all the way back to Edgbaston and thinking to themselves, well, we had Australia 128 for 8 and somehow lost that game. There were occasions and turnarounds right the way through the series where one team or the other was on top and odds on to win, and somehow they didn't. So perhaps 2-2 is a fair reflection. I do think, however, that the biggest tactical, you talk about Joe Root as a captain, the biggest tactical blunder in the entire series was Payne winning the toss and deciding to field at the Oval. His bowlers had only just managed to bowl them to victory in a really tough Test match at Old Trafford. They were very, very tired. Pitch was dry. The pitches at the Oval tend to, you bat first, you score runs, it turns later in the game, all of those things. So not only did they do that, but they also left both Stark and Pattinson on the bench. Now, I figured that Pattinson would probably come back into the Test match for Australia for Stark. But that wasn't the case. They went back to Peter Siddle, whose style of bowling on what are generally pretty flat, hard pitches is kind of not as useful to Tim Payne as one of his quicker guys would have been. So all in all, they made some mistakes there and allowed England the chance to get themselves a foothold in the Test match. And then, from there on in, England got their noses in front and never let it go, which is not a situation.
What you wanted to see.
Well, exactly. It's not a position they found themselves in very often in the series. And so, listen, two teams who played in unbelievable cricket in patches and very, very poor cricket in patches. And so, given those circumstances, 2-2 is not a bad reflection of it.
Not a bad one either. Well, a couple of other points to touch on. I'm going to loop them all into one because it has to do with going forward. And the thing that we were talking about so many times, and one of the reasons as well why Joe Root came under some criticism too, was the fact that he wasn't scoring any runs, and he's a part of a top order that really wasn't scoring any runs either, or not as many as you say that, you want to see the top order give you at least 300 runs or possibly even more, especially against Australia. So how do you see them, flirting with the changes going forward? We saw Joe Denley finally come good. Rory Burns, also got some runs as well. So where do you see them falling?
Well, Burns has cemented himself at the top of the order. England have been desperate to find an opening batsman worthy of the name, and they've done so in the Surrey captain. So he's played really, really well. Caught brilliantly at slip as well. I think he's really come of age in this series. So that's a massive tick. Before the series started, it was clear that Joe Denley was going to be in the lineup. And goodness me, I don't know how many times I said it before the start and right the way to the end, that if he's going to play, he's the guy that should be opening the batting for you. He did it in the early part of his career, has knowledge of it, is experienced, and that given the style that he was likely to play in, that he was the best option England had, given the players that they had at their disposal. And he played really, really well. Shame for him that he didn't make his first Test match 100. So you've got those two things taken care of. For me, I still think Joe Root's better off at 4. He's not scored the runs at number 3. I think it's
Do you think he'll go back to that?
I think
for
he'll
the
go back.
series?
I think he'll go back.
And what do they do with Jason Roy?
Well, Jason, perhaps they've thrown him a bit of a hospital pass, I think, in asking him to open the batting. Particularly given that Joe had decided that he was going to bat at number 3. So right from the very off, given that set of circumstances, you put Jason at 4, Joe Denley at 1, and you give the batting lineup, the top 5 or 6 as a whole, the chance to score you as many runs as possible. Not necessarily for one person to shine or for 2 or 3 people. You know, you just put them in an order where they're likely to succeed. Perhaps put that 300 on the board on a regular basis. Jason has kind of now found himself on the outside. It was almost merciful to leave him out, and they've given, you know, for a guy as talented as he is, he's basically really struggling to get himself back into the team now. And I think he will come again, but where that is and when that comes is going to be a very difficult one for them to work out now. So what I think is going to happen is that Joe, I think, will be very happy to slide back down to number 4. And with the 2, Denley and Rory Burns at the top of the order, they have an opportunity perhaps to pick another specialist opening batsman and put him in at number 3. And really try to sort of solidify England's batting lineup against the new ball, and perhaps have them pave the way for the stroke makers coming in behind them. So that means that somebody like Dominic Sibley or perhaps Zach Crawley from Kent, guys who've had rave notices from the county game, will be on notice that England might be on the lookout for another opening batsman to bat in that top 3.
Ben Stokes can't do it all, man. That top order has to do something indeed. All right, well, some interesting and changing times ahead for this England team. We'll definitely be looking ahead to the upcoming series against New Zealand and South Africa in closer detail. Just stay tuned.